Hey, and welcome to the MaltyTalky channel, the second video on this channel where I will share my whiskey journey on a student budget. And we're going to be reviewing our next whiskey, and this is going to be part of my regular Thursday video. I will try to upload a video every single Thursday as I go through this experience. And if you haven't already, make sure you check out my first video where I will share what whiskey started my journey. That whiskey was Vat 69. Fantastic whiskey, and with a little bit of a story behind it that really got me started in getting into whiskey. And it's the first whiskey that I actually bought. Now, of course, as I said in that video, I did drink other whiskeys before, you know, a little sip here and there. And the first whiskey that I really got as a birthday present, and I think which is something that is regularly given as a birthday present, is Jack Daniel's Old Number 7. Now, from what I heard, it's good to, get your bearings when you're starting your whiskey journey or anywhere in that journey, basically, knowing what a good and a bad whiskey is. Well, luckily, I've tasted some good whiskeys already, including, for example, Glenmorangie 10. Vat 69 is a personal favorite as a blended whiskey. I already had Kulila Mock, so there are some whiskeys out there that I already tried, but in order to get to know the low end of the spectrum, which unfortunately Jack Daniel's Old Number 7 is, if you regard it as a whiskey that you taste neat out of a real tasting glass. Of course, this whiskey is probably great to drink on the rocks, with ice and in mixing, but it's not really a whiskey to find any complexity behind, because it's simply not really there, and that's not, of course, what this whiskey is all about. I mean, it's a mass production, and in this video I'd like to give it a short little review in 2019, tell you what I think of it, nose it, and then give you a newbie perspective, so to speak, because again, I'm not a whiskey expert at all. I'm just starting on this journey, but I love to share it with you guys. So Jack Daniel's Old Number 7 is, I think, very well known. I'll just quickly show you the label. As you can see, 70 centiliters in this bottle, 40% volume, no age statement, of course, and it's a Tennessee whiskey. Now again, this whiskey is a mass production whiskey. You will find it anywhere around the world. A lot of people know it, and even people that are not into the whiskey world know about this. You can easily order it at any bar. And it's kind of an interesting product in relation to Scotch whiskey. This is a Tennessee whiskey again, so it's a different and unique style. And it's different mainly in that it's being run through a charcoal tower, sort of, where it gains a lot of the sweetness that you can find in a whiskey. And after it runs through this maple syrup charcoal, it's being stored in barrels of their own making, which further matures the whiskey. Although, if it's really maturing, it probably does not do a lot. But we'll find out. Maybe we'll get some oakiness out of the whiskey, because oak barrels are also used. So a little bit of a different way of developing the whiskey. Let's take a look at the bottle. Again, Tennessee sour mash whiskey, 70 centiliters, 40% volume, distilled and bottled by Jack Daniel's Distillery in Lynchburg, Tennessee, in the US of A. On the side, read some information. Here at the Jack Daniel Distillery, we're proud to honor the independence and integrity of the man who established our distillery at the Cave Spring Hollow, true to Mr. Jack whiskey making tradition. We still mellow our whiskey drop by drop and stand by Jack's charge. And there's a quote, "Every day we make it, we'll make it the best we can." Well, quality and craftsmanship since 1866. A long time ago. So this is an old whiskey. It's being mellowed for smoothness, drop by drop, through sugar maple charcoal, matured in handcraft barrels. It's tasted by the masters in order to determine when the whiskey is actually ready, and it has received quite a few rewards, 7 gold medals since 1904. Now, if you say this to any whiskey geek, I think they are not impressed by this advertising on the bottle. Usually the more advertising, the less complex the whiskey is probably going to be, because it's really about making sales here, of course. It's about mass production, and it's getting it out there, which is fine. I mean, you have to give credit to Jack Daniel's for being able to do that and make all these sales and sell this whiskey worldwide, making this one of the most well-known whiskeys out there. So, without further ado, let's open up this bottle. As you can see, I've already had a few sips out of this particular bottle. Got this a few weeks ago. It's just a screw cap. Immediately when you open it, you get kind of this sweetness, quite a bit of a sweetness. So let me just pour a dram here. There we go. Now, I don't have a Glencairn glass yet, and as you can see, my studio setup is not very elegant either. But it doesn't matter. Again, I'm on student budget, and I'm just trying this on the go. All right. Now, this is simply sort of a Glencairn glass, not really, of course. It has kind of the same shape. It's from the Glenlivet distillery, but it kind of helps with nosing the whiskey and all that stuff. All right, well, the color, well, as you can see, I'll cut it a little bit closer. As you can see, of course, it depends a little bit on how the camera is judging the colors, but basically it's quite orangey looking. So there's quite a bit of color added to this whiskey. Again, to make it more appealing to the general public, I would say. All right, let's nose it a little bit first. This is glue. That's something that's very apparent. If you ever have made model aircrafts from, for example, Revell, you will notice this smell. If you use that glue to glue those aircraft together, this is kind of similar. So it's not very nice. I'm trying to find in the background what else is there, but it's very difficult. This glue smell is pretty apparent, and this is a young whiskey. It kind of makes sense, and this is a young spirit which has not mellowed down yet, I guess. So. It's hard to get through. Taking a few smells definitely helps, kind of with the mouth open as well. You kind of notice a little bit of a vanilla background, quite a sweet smell to it. And I guess, this is just a very sweet whiskey, and it's very apparent. When you kind of forget about the glue note in the nose, you really get this sweetness, a very distinct sweetness, very as if they put a lot of sugar in this, which of course they didn't, but you do kind of at some point get the maple syrup charcoal idea if you look for it carefully. All right, let's have a taste. Cheers. Sweetness is definitely apparent. It's not complex at all. Let me tell you that. There are only kind of 2 or 3 flavor notes that I'm getting with this whiskey. It's just bitterness from the alcohol, from the young spirit. And kind of this, once the whiskey is kind of floating around in the mouth, you get this very distinct sweetness, almost like when you would go, for example, to the fair here in the Netherlands on King's Day or whatever, you will see a lot of children eating candy floss. And this is kind of what reminds me of this whiskey. Candy floss is this utter sweetness, which maybe as a kid is nice, but once you kind of grow over that, you don't really appreciate it anymore. So again, it's not complex at all. Again, that's not something that you should expect with this whiskey. So if you look up this whiskey review and think, I really want to taste this whiskey in respect to, say, an age statement whiskey, any age statement whiskey from Scotland, I'm gonna have to disappoint you, because this just does not compare to that. It's not in the same league, so to speak. And again, that's not something we expect. That's not what this whiskey is about. Because I'm sure a lot of people enjoy this as a very simple whiskey. on a random night, maybe in a bar with some ice with it, or maybe as part of a mixing drink, this could work very well. Again, it's not complex and there's nothing to waste with this whiskey basically. I mean, I might sound a little bit negative here, but those are actually positive things about this whiskey, I would say. That, thanks to not having complexity, you kind of, introduce people to whiskey, or maybe let people enjoy kind of what whiskey can do, although complexity is very hard to find. Again, even a second sip, there's no other complexity coming through. It's really the bitterness that kicks in from the young spirit, I would say. Yes, there's a little bit of honey, a little bit of vanilla, but again, this candy floss sweetness is really apparent. I do not really get any cask or barrel influenced, as they would say. It's very hard to find. Maybe once this whiskey kind of mellows down, you'll be able to find a little bit of oakiness, but it's very far in the background. So this whiskey has not matured for very long. It's really the young spirit and the original spirit that you're actually tasting mostly, I would say, and the rest is not really apparent. Maybe far in the background. Again, once this whiskey sits a little bit, kind of mellows down, kind of oxidizes, and kind of loses some of that bitterness and astringentness from the alcohol, you might be able to get some of those flavor notes, but right now I'm not getting any. Let's have one more sip. And the arrival is very sweet. Then some sort of bitterness starts to kick in, which a little bit later in the development kind of turns into an unpleasant bitterness. And the finish is really that candy floss sweetness. A little bit of oakiness coming through the end, but it's not much. It's not much. The taste that you have at the end in your mouth is really this candy floss sweetness. It's hard to get rid of. It's kind of unpleasant in a way. So you might enjoy some foods, whether it be crisps or whatever, some salty food, to kind of get rid of that sweetness. Now, I'm simply not really a sweet type of guy. I'm really more into the savory side of things. So for me, something like a peaty whiskey, but also a subtle whiskey like the Glenmorangie 10, is, it's just so much more well-rounded and so much more complex. You're able to find different kinds of sweetness. But the only type of sweetness that I find in this whiskey is an unpleasant one, unfortunately. Taking one more sip here. I have to say, this sip, a little bit less whiskey, giving a little bit more room to explore the tongue. A little bit more maple syrup, I have to say. It's a little bit less unpleasant. The bitterness is less when this whiskey, when you kind of taste it, a very small sip. And I guess this helps with mixing drinks as well, or drinking it with ice, allowing the whiskey to kind of tone down by adding some water, getting rid of a little bit of that bitterness that comes through from the young spirit. And that brings out the sweet flavor. And I have to say, if you really take a tiny sip, some more of this more nice maple syrup sweetness actually comes through. So that's quite surprising. Let me try one more time. It definitely helps. Not really in the development, but the arrival is definitely more of the maple syrup sweetness that you expect. Not really that astringent candy floss sweetness like I described before. So there you have it, Jack Daniel's Old Number 7. I'm not going to give it this a mark or anything. I don't really have a mark system yet. I don't think I'm really in a position to give marks at this stage of my whiskey journey yet. So I'd rather leave that for the experienced YouTubers out there. But this is good to get your bearing. This allows you to know kind of what's on the low end of the spectrum. Again, not because this whiskey is particularly bad, but it's more about, do we find the same kind of complexity in this whiskey as the whiskeys that have an age statement, that have matured, in different casks, that have that are not as mass produced as this whiskey. If you do not take that into account, I guess you would be able to give this whiskey a fair mark, given its nature and giving its possibilities in other drinks or mixing or on the rocks. So I would definitely suggest to try this in different settings as well. But again, as a whiskey on its own, in relation to the more complex whiskeys that you might try later on, it's not something that will really amaze you. But again, it's good to know and get your bearings so that you can compare this, to other whiskeys. So you know what sort of a singular whiskey this is without that complexity, which is the few flavor notes coming at you. On the one hand, it's good that you know that such whiskeys are out there. On the other hand, it's kind of bad. I would not start with this whiskey if you're really getting into a serious whiskey journey, because otherwise you're going to try to find complexity behind it, which is just not there, and you're looking too hard for it. So I think with any whiskeys that you're trying, the flavor notes should really come towards you, right? And currently that's just not happening, unfortunately. So I'd rather suggest going for a little bit more complex whiskey, and I think from my own experience, choosing VAT 69 for that, even though it's a blended whiskey, it's not particularly complex, but still you do feel that you get more flavor notes from it, more complexity, and a actual development with an arrival, development, and a finish that actually shows character. But with this whiskey, you just don't have that. So I would recommend not to start with this whiskey if you're really new to the whiskey journey. I think that's something I can fairly say at this point. But do get it later on. You'll probably get this from someone as a gift at some point. Whether it will be for Christmas or whatever. It's a very popular whiskey as a gift. So I would definitely check it out after you've already tried a little bit more complex whiskey. So you learn that the whiskey flavor notes should come towards you rather than looking for it in a whiskey where the complexity is simply not there. So I'd like to thank you for watching this review here at MaltyTalky. Again, this is my very first review, so bear with me. By all means, make sure you leave down in the comments what you think of this whiskey, and if you have anything I could improve. Again, I'm on a cheap setup right here, but this works well. I hope you will enjoy it if you're watching this, and that would definitely be appreciated if you could let me know how you are enjoying this channel and this newbie perspective. Now, this Jack Daniel's bottle, by the way, came with this little Jack Daniel's Tennessee honey liqueur. So it's not really a whiskey, but I'm keen to try it out actually. It's 35% volume, and I think I will just provide a separate review of this. Again, it's not a whiskey. I expect it to be very sweet, more something that you would kind of put in your coffee or something. But why not try it? It never hurts, I would say. So stay tuned for that one. So I'm going to say cheers one more time here with the Jack Daniel's Old No. 7, allowing me to give myself a bearing for my whiskey journey. So cheers and see you next time.